we're finally out driving the car again, which is really nice. It's a beautiful summer's day, 2022, August, and thought I would get the car out and drive it. I've been driving it a fair bit actually. It's been almost reliable. It did break down one time or stop. There was a video, the previous video I think, where I talked about that. It was a nut loose in the distributor, which was a very easy fix, but I hadn't realised that at the time. So I'm out in the car. Everything seems to be working well. The exhaust I'm happy with. Makes it's a little bit louder than standard, but not very. So very happy with that. Everything else seems to be working okay. Temperature is really steady. Oil pressure really steady. Charging. Got 3/4 of a tank of petrol. So what could be better out on a summer's day? It is quite hot, so you'll have to excuse the legs, but not much I can do about that. There is a rattle on the car. I need to find out what that is. This road, this is a terrible road, but there's a rattle at the front. I can hear it with the window down. So I'll have to have a look at that. But anyway, so yeah, it's things are going well at the moment, apart from the minor issue with the distributor. Very odd thing. You would think, feels like it should be a lock nut on there. There's a nut that holds down a nylon insulating washer on the spring for the points, and yeah, it just doesn't seem very positive, but what do I know? Anyway, I put some Loctite on it, and hopefully that won't come loose again. Not quite sure where we're going here. I'm just tootling around Oxfordshire and Berkshire. Anyway, do a bit of driving. So for those of you who don't know much about this car, it's a Rover P5B 1968, and the history of Rover after the war was, I think initially in 1945 they kind of relaunched the pre-war model. I think the P3 was it called. Then in 1949-48 they launched the Land Rover. Can't exactly remember my years. Then I think in 49 they launched the P4, and the P4 was much more modern compared to the post-war cars. It was styled somewhat similarly to, I think, a Studebaker in the US. Apparently Rover bought one over, and the styling was somewhat similar. The early ones had 3 headlights. They had a central headlight called Cyclops, obviously, and the P4 was Rover's main car, but through the 50s the Land Rover was really selling in increasing volumes. So you know, Rover really were by the late 50s a 4x4 company with a side business in passenger cars, the P4, and the P5 was being developed in the early 50s, and originally it was to replace the P4. But Rover struggled with space at the Solihull factory. They couldn't get planning permission to expand the Solihull factory how they would like to. So, and they were needing more and more space for the Land Rover as well. So they took the decision to push the P5 more up market. So it got bigger through the 50s as it was being developed. And the idea being that the P5 wouldn't replace the P4, but would be an additional model higher up in the range. And that's what happened when the P5 launched in 1958. It was originally meant to launch in saloon and coupe form, but the coupe wasn't ready. Rover originally it was going to be a pillarless coupe, but Rover couldn't get the windows to seal properly, so they had to redesign it, and it's got stainless steel window frames and a lower roofline, but they could, anyway, they had to delay the launch of the coupe. So P5 launched in 1958 as a saloon with a 3-litre V6 straight 6 engine. It went through numerous models, so there was the Mark 1, Mark 1A, Mark 2 and then Mark 3 until 1967 Rover launched the P5B, and the B stood for Buick because Rover had bought the original design for the 3.5-litre V8 engine from Buick. Buick had only used it for a few years in the early 60s. I think it was called the Fireball engine, and it was aluminium, which is quite novel for a lot of engines, but particularly in the US. And I think there was pressure from the steel unions not to focus too much on aluminium, but also I think some drivers weren't used to an aluminium engine needing to have special additives in the coolant, and so Buick didn't use it for very long, but I think they were happy to sell it to Rover. So Rover bought the design and kind of redesigned bits of it and made it easier to manufacture in the UK with our casting techniques, and it launched as the P5B in 1967. It was quite a good move by Rover because it kept the P5 design alive while they were working on the replacement, and actually demand for the P5B outstripped Rover's expectations for a short time. And it's also meant that they could test the engine, the V8 engine, in a low volume model before using it in the Range Rover and the P6 and the SD1, and got used everywhere else, well, in a lot of other places. So it was a good move by Rover to launch it in the P5B 1967. This is a 1968 car. It didn't really change much after 1967. There were various revisions, but the car stayed as it was until 1973 when it was ended production. The original plan was in 1971 for Rover to launch the P8 to replace the P5, and the P8 was a much more modern car, almost too modern. It was too of its time. It was kind of Coke bottle styling, very modern interior. Probably the styling would have dated through the 70s. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the Granada, the first Granada, in its styling. But unfortunately the P8 was cancelled just before it was due to launch. I think they'd actually got the production tooling ready. It was cancelled at the last minute, which was a real blow to everyone involved. And there were various theories about why British Leyland cancelled it. One theory was that it would have competed with the Jaguar XJ6 too much. And by the early 70s, British Leyland were having to cut their funding and concentrate on volume models like the Marina and the Allegro. So that could be true. They just didn't want to continue spending money on a model that would compete with an existing model, although it was almost ready for production. The other theory is that the P8 failed crash tests, and there are some photos that you can see of a P8 that's been crash tested, and they look fairly catastrophic. The A pillars have deformed massively. The sill has detached from the A pillar. The engine compartment hasn't really crumpled as it should have, and or the sill and A pillar isn't strong enough, and the roof. So that is possible as well, that it didn't pass crashworthiness tests or pass them well enough. Rover were somewhat starting to focus on safety with the P5, with the P6. So and Mercedes were launching cars that were very heavily focused on safety. So it is possible. Maybe it was a combination of the two. British Lane never really formally commented on why they cancelled it. It was really just announced in the newspaper, I think in '71, really 6 months before the P8 was going to launch. So massive blow, and that obviously left Rover with a massive problem. So the P5B carried on to '73 when it was eventually stopped production, but it wasn't really replaced until '76 with the SD1. So there was a 3-year period where really Rover only had the P6 car on the market. So and we all know the SD1 was beautiful design, really cleverly engineered, but not very well production engineered and manufactured, which didn't do Rover's image any good. But it used the same, pretty much the same V8 engine that this is using, so it was a very desirable car when it launched. So P5 soldiered on. I mean, by '73 it was very old-fashioned. What you see here is pretty much what you'd have had in '73. A hard, thin, big bus wheel, steering wheel with a chrome horn ring was. It's a 50s design. I'm surprised Rover didn't at least update the steering wheel, but anyway, I like it. It's really a 50s design, although this is a '68 model. So we're nearly home. I've been out all day driving around, taking video, and cars run perfectly. Got through nearly half a tank of fuel, but cars run really well. I mean, there's a few, you may hear some squeaks and things that have developed in the dashboard. Need to look at that. And as I said earlier, there's lots of things still to sort on the car, but it is running as well as I would want it to be at the moment. So we're nearly home. That will be it for another video. See you in the next one. Bye.